Welcome to the show. Welcome to State of Cloud Native. This is going to be all about what is Cloud Native, anyways. And I'm actually joined by Kamesh and Ron. I'll be hopping off, and they'll actually be taking you through this journey. So let me go ahead and introduce Kamesh. This is Kamesh, one of my partners in crime in marketing, and then Ron, market CTO. So I'll pause the video over here. Let me go ahead and hop it off and hand it off to you two.
All right,
Have a
Mike,
good
thanks
show.
for hosting.
Cheers.
Thanks for hosting this live stream for the past
Yep.
few weeks. It's been fun, and I've been watching some of your stuff. So thank you, and we'll take it from here. Thanks, Mike.
Yep. Enjoy it.
Thanks, Mike.
All righty. Hey, Ron, how's it going?
Going very well, Kamesh. How are you doing?
Good, good. Happy Friday.
Happy.
So hopefully the week went well for you, and here we are on this live stream to chat about what the heck is cloud native anyways, which is probably a topic close to your heart, as is it to my heart. So I guess before we dive into the whole topic here, Ron, it'd be good for folks on the live stream to get a little bit of background on your kind of career, where you came from, and this whole cloud native journey, your own, very quick, relevant experience and background. And I'll kind of say a little bit about myself too after that. So go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Started as an engineer by education, both my bachelor's and master's degrees. Almost 30 years ago now. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to admit it.
You're aging yourself here now.
It's been a while.
Yeah.
Cloud started for me after like a long stretch focused in networking, actually from a cloud gaming perspective. This is getting popularity now, but when it started from like 2010 time frame, obviously it was quite a challenging idea to think that the actual game engine would move completely to the cloud. And then I spent quite a long time at Nokia as a software CTO, really working on how do we go from the network built from PNFs or physical network functions, as we're now calling it, boxes, to being pure software. And as you consider kind of like the migration that requires, there are multiple different types of cloud, starting from just regular virtualization all the way to cloud native that we'll talk about. And as an industry, I would say that path was approximately 6 years old, really almost 10 end to end if you take into account like things that had to be done from an architecture and discussion before we started, leading us to to this point.
Yeah.
Now with Platform 9, obviously helping different types of industries and organizations take a similar path from wherever they are in their software journey to
Yeah.
cloud native.
Yeah. A lot of buzz about cloud native, obviously, these days. My own journey started in cloud. Oh gosh, it's been 12 years now, mostly in open source, right? I started with Linux, OpenStack on the product marketing, product management side. And it's been a long, very interesting journey. This whole thing about public cloud taking off and then the open source communities with OpenStack and now Kubernetes and the whole CNCF ecosystem. Been watching it, seeing how it actually evolved. I remember I was in the very first OpenStack summit back in Boston. I think it was 2009 or 10. And then I was on the very first CNCF Kubernetes summit in Seattle 6 years ago. And just in 10 years, things have changed dramatically, right? I mean, just the whole ecosystem has evolved very quickly, and I'm kind of excited about where we are. But having said that,
And
there's
maybe
so much.
maybe
Yeah,
on the
yeah,
OpenStack and Kubernetes, I'm just
yeah,
curious, like
yeah.
there was Cloud Stacks somewhere in the middle before OpenStack,
There
and
was, there was,
Docker is
yeah,
like the big thing, before
right.
Kubernetes. So I'm just
That's right.
curious,
That's right. Yeah.
how did you experience those
So
transactions?
I'll give you my story. I was at Dell at the time. I was a product manager for the open source product line over there. And Cloud Stack and OpenStack were the rivals, believe it or not. We were trying to figure out which of these two projects or products should we use for the Dell's offering. And there was a lot of back and forth. Cloud Stack was actually much more mature at the time. It was a well-built product. It just did its job. While OpenStack was more open source, right? It was more community driven. There was all this momentum around it. And everybody was like, open source, it's not really ready, it's not mature. Uh, and then, eventually, you won't believe it, we kind of ended up with OpenStack.
Yeah.
The reason was mainly because we saw that there was so much momentum, so many developers, so many people contributing to it. So the logic was, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this, Ron, as well. The logic back then was that because it's open source, there's a lot of innovation happening there. And also, there's going to be these open standards, if you will, right? APIs and standards. And that's what we need in the industry. Because if
Yeah.
you take the flip side of that coin is proprietary APIs, closed ecosystems, innovation that happens only within a one or two companies. So those were the two kind of decision point was, hey, we needed something much more open, much more dynamic, much more diverse, people that are building to open standards. And that's how we went down the OpenStack route.
Yeah.
And long story short, I'm pretty sure you have followed the OpenStack. Now it's more prevalent in the telco industry
That's
than
right.
it is in the broader enterprise ecosystem. But then Kubernetes came along. We had the exact same discussions with Docker Swarm and Kubernetes. It was exactly the same discussion. Which one should we adopt? Docker Swarm, of course, was by Docker. It was still open source. But then the question was Kubernetes had just taken off because Google had announced that it was going to make it open source. And I remember I was at Marantis at that time, and we were sitting in a conference room with our management team, and we were saying, "Hey, who should we partner with? Should it be Docker, Swarm? Should we go after? Should we, do the open source Kubernetes stuff?" And we did the exact same decision, do Kubernetes. So I'm curious about, I'm pretty sure you
Yeah.
had decisions like this too,
Yeah,
right?
very
Yeah,
similar for me as well. I mean, we started
yeah,
with Cloud Stack.
hmm
Actually, got the product out completely based on Cloud Stack.
mm,
Watching OpenStack, thinking, is it going to be a thing or not?
yeah,
Being open source and seeing all this contribution, essentially making the
yeah,
same kind of
yeah, yeah.
path as you described, just
Mhm.
understanding that eventually, right, it's going to
Mhm.
tip over. So
Yeah.
it started actually the shadow project, just, let's try to keep up, see what we can
Mhm.
take out of it.
Mhm.
And at some point, decided to flip.
Mhm.
It's kind of interesting though, because the thinking changed quite a bit
Mhm.
since then. I mean, looking at it as open source back then, the thinking was, it's going to progress faster, right?
Yes.
And I
Right.
think that what we learned, somewhat in the hard way
Mhm.
is, there's a lot of innovation faster, but it doesn't
Yeah.
mature faster.
Right.
So it's much more open.
Yeah.
Obviously, acceptance is, much more
Yeah.
broad, but it
Yeah.
usually actually takes longer to mature and get
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
production readiness.
This is actually a classic conundrum. Again, I think there's a similar kind of path in the telco world if you think about aggregation versus disaggregation, right? So you could go with disaggregated components, open source components, but then you have to put it all together yourself. You have to integrate them. They're not all very mature, they're all evolving at different rates. The burden then falls back on you
That's
to
right.
make sure that it's production ready, right? And that's the trade off, in my opinion, is the trade off is, more innovation, more contribution, but then maturity isn't there, production readiness isn't there. So time to value, business value versus innovation, I guess, is the classic conundrum, if you will. So why don't we jump into the topic for today, cloud native, right? So let me just kind of throw my 2 cents on that. I think cloud native really came about when CNCF defined it, maybe
Mm.
4 or 5 years ago. But we've had plenty of debates, and I'm pretty sure you had too, about what it is. What is cloud native? But before we talk about that, why don't we talk about what cloud native is not, right? Because the
Yeah.
term means different things to different people. Every time this happens in the industry, right? Somebody comes up with some term and everybody gets hyped up around it. Every company pushes their own POV around that. They'll say, "Oh, cloud native means this," because they have some some product to sell, and they'll slap the cloud native term on top of whatever they're doing. We used to call it lipstick on the pig back in the day. you
That's
know
that's
it's if it's even if it's not cloud, people just throw the word cloud on top and just say, hey, we are cloud too. So
that's right.
similar stuff is happening with cloud native these days. There are lots of myths, misconceptions. So why don't we talk about what cloud native is not? Let's hear your perspective on it.
You know, I think it was like 5 or 6 years ago, there was a cartoon
Yeah,
that pretty much defined, I think,
yeah,
what was happening at the time. And the cartoon basically showed an IT manager,
yeah,
scratching the name data center
yeah,
and writing public cloud. Okay.
yeah,
And I think that for quite a long time, there was
yeah.
this view that to be cloud native,
Hmm.
what you really need to do is just take your stuff
Yeah.
and move it to
Mm.
essentially somebody else's infrastructure.
The
Okay?
public cloud. Yeah, the whole
But yeah,
movement to public cloud. Yeah.
you shift, your workloads, and
Hmm.
somehow, you'll get all these benefits.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure, okay, that most understand that it's definitely not that. It's very
Yeah.
easy, to do that. It's
It's
sometimes
called
even
lift and shift is the
lift
term
and
that
shift.
people use for that. Yeah. Right.
That's right. But
Hmm.
the question I think that the industry keeps on asking itself now for many many years are really a list of some very basic benefits that are
Hmm.
expected,
Hmm.
and none of them really going to be answered by simply the same thing that you did before and moving it somewhere else.
Right.
And then just for completion, maybe the reverse is I think also should be discussed, which is that it's perfectly possible to become cloud native without going anywhere,
Yeah.
right? So with that, with
Yeah.
enough technology, design, and planning, you
Hmm.
can take the same good old data center or set of data
Yep.
centers
Yep.
on-premise type of deployments that you had
Hmm.
and achieve 100% state of cloud
Right.
nativeness.
Right. And you went through this journey. We'll get to that later. I think, right, in your previous roles, you actually went through the journey of taking your existing infrastructure or existing data center and turning it into quote unquote cloud native. Correct?
That's right.
Right. We'll talk about that, which brings us to the next question, right? So, why should I care? I mean, why should I care about become before we define what it is,
Yeah.
right? I mean, is going to a public cloud good enough? Do I need to be cloud native? What is it that I will get? What will my world look like if I were to theoretically be 100% cloud native, whatever that is? What is the business benefits of that?
Maybe before we touch on the business benefit,
Yeah.
we'll actually start from the bottom of the contribution. So you have a developer
Yeah.
writing code, creating new value. Okay, and for the sake of discussion, this is true business logic, meaning the company main business has hired a developer to create new capabilities, something that they can position with their customers. Okay,
Hmm.
what does that person want? They want to complete the task as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
They want to be able to push it into production as fast as possible.
Hmm.
They don't really care. Okay, I mean, as an ex-developer, like exactly how it's going to run. Yeah,
Hmm.
so they want the freedom to
Yeah.
be able to push it to wherever.
Hmm.
And I think I said fast enough times, but they don't want blockers in the way. Yeah, so if in the old days networking was usually a blocker, had to be predefined, then compute had to be
Hmm.
redefined. now IT somewhere in the middle, kind of like creating different limitations. All that is not something that is appreciated. Yeah. Now, the DevOps teams that is there usually to support all these actions are a little bit stuck, as well, because they want all these things as well, but they also have to make sure that operationally, things are very, very, easy to manage, really, from the point of view that they want to make sure that SLAs are kept and, customers are, extremely happy with the outcome. So they want to get out of the way, but not to a degree where things get out of control, where scale can translate to disaster, right? So you want to make it just available enough, right, to let the developers go wild, but make sure that when you reach scale, things actually operate quite well.
Yeah. So it sounds like, Ron, I mean, obviously the value, as you mentioned, is developers building applications that are driving business value for
That's
the
right.
for the company. And software is the new king, right? Software is the new oil, as people say.
That's
If
right.
you're not building software, new innovations, and responding to your customer needs and doing all of those things, you're going to fall behind as a company in today's world. If you're not a digital native, as people say, right? You're gonna, and because here's the thing, right? And I'm pretty sure I've had teenage kids, and you probably do. We've been along long enough, and they are the millennials, right? The Gen X's and Y's, whatever. They're already used to this digital environment, right? They want everything instantly. Everything's on their phone. And if they go into the work environment and find out that they have to wait, that'll be a complete anathema for them. They'll say, "What? Why do I have to wait 5 days to get something?"
That's right.
Right? And
And
and that's changing entirely. The generation is also driving it, I think.
that's right. And I think you said it before, quite clearly. I mean, it's the time to value. Yeah.
Hmm.
So I mean,
Yeah.
at the end, the business owner of the software, I mean, her target
Yeah.
is to make the customer happy. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
How exactly that happens is a little bit less of a concern,
Hmm.
except again for one wrinkle, that everybody is in business to create margin. So
Yes.
it does have to have some controls over how expensive it gets. And we see now in the market a little bit of a correction, because like go fast and grow as quickly as possible
Mm.
clearly had some costs that are now
Yeah.
being scrutinized, right?
No, totally. Growth at any cost is no longer the mantra.
Correct.
We are entering a downturn. I don't think there's any question about it. Everybody feels it, especially in the tech industry. There's a lot of scrutiny around cost. There's a
Yeah.
lot of scrutiny around security and governance, and because cybersecurity is a real thing. And so the flip side of this, right? So you're right, Ron, when you said that you want to enable the developer to push code as quickly as possible into production as quickly as possible. But then, like you said, you need controls around it. You need governance around it. You need security around it. And if you just leave everything open, you could end up with total chaos, right?
That's right.
And that's the other challenge to it. So now the question is, well, we just kind of touched upon it, but does every company need to be cloud native, really?
Well, company level, I would say yes,
Hmm.
but not with everything that they have already running or planning to do. Yeah. I mean,
Hmm.
I can't imagine a scenario where a company that is in the business of software or utilizing software for the benefit of their business will not need to become cloud native, but we have to accept, might be the right term, that they're just workloads that have been there, and they do their thing, and they may never need to become cloud native, and
Hmm.
it's not a problem. Okay, I mean,
All mainframes come to mind. They're still around, right?
exactly. I mean,
Yeah,
I mean, something even think older than that. And
yeah,
if it fulfills the function, one
mhm,
has to wonder, like, does it make sense
mhm,
to actually rewrite it, and if so, for what benefit? Now, the how to actually build new things around it in a way that
mhm,
you're not, limited in the creation of new things is a
mhm,
topic.
mhm,
But for sure, I mean, it would be too costly, I think, for most businesses to treat this problem as like an all or nothing. Yeah,
mhm.
new software. Like if you're starting a new project
Yep.
today, pretty much
Greenfield. Yeah,
every
Greenfield. Yeah.
industry,
Hmm.
I would say I cannot think. I cannot think, right, of a use case where somebody might say, you know what, yeah, this doesn't make any sense to go cloud native. We'll do it the same old way, and keep it as such.
Well, I guess the follow-on question to that is, what is the cost of going cloud native? To let's say I am that guy trying to make that decision, right?
Hmm.
I have a new project, whatever it is. It might be a new mobile application that I want to build, or it could be some backend application that I want to build. And I have the tools, I have the developers, I have the team that knows how to work with, I don't know, VMware, for example,
Mhm.
or some old school, not even Java. I'm going even back further, C++. I mean, that's the team I have,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And the new project comes along, business says, hey guys, you got to build this thing. I need you to do, again, every business wants stuff yesterday, so there's always a time to market pressure to get it done quickly. What do I do? I mean, I can't go retool everybody. It's going to take forever. This cloud native, and we'll get into that in a second, is all these new tooling, right? We're talking about Kubernetes, we're talking about containerization, and all of this CNCF stuff, which seems to be bewilderingly vast. I
Mhm.
just looked at the CNCF list of things. It's like a massive list of logos with 500,000 different, components. If I'm one of those guys with this old school team that's sitting around, that's not gonna. I look at it and go, forget it.
Um, yeah, there is a risk of that, but
Mhm.
you could actually ask yourself, like, do we have the correct and more modern mindset? And maybe I'll use myself as an example, right? I
Mhm.
mean,
Mhm.
I grew into an environment as an engineer where the pride
Mhm.
came from building everything from scratch. And I
Mm.
mean everything, right? If you had
Yeah.
the opportunity to influence the operating system, the all the better, right?
Mhm.
Um, in modern development, the pride comes almost from reuse. Like,
Mm.
why build everything from scratch? And just, maybe as an anecdote, I compared notes with my daughter.
Mm.
We had a high school project
Mm.
to create a game,
Mhm.
and it just happened to be a very similar game to a game I wrote in high school. Okay.
Mm. Mm.
Um, I had to figure out how to put every pixel on the screen with code.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Back
Okay.
in the day.
Back in
Yeah.
the yeah.
Yeah.
She barely had to do actual what I would consider programming, meaning code in text. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's where, like, the modernization needs to start. Like, this mindset of, like, do we have to build everything?
Yeah.
Do we have the right tooling, if we're going to abstract, and do we have the right mindset to do that?
Mhm.
And then what out of the software stack we're creating falls into which category? Because again,
Mm.
there might be pieces. For example, if
Mm.
you need very specific hardware for your
Mm.
software, that is perfectly fine that that piece will continue to be C or C++, like really
Right.
embedded style development. But it doesn't mean that the whole project cannot
Mm.
be cloud native.
Right. Right. Right.
So
Sounds like it's a lot of. I mean, I was an engineer myself too, long time back. I have a computer science degree, so I wrote code back in the day. And even back then, if I can roll back several years, I did write some code from scratch But for the most part, I would look for things, libraries, we used to call them, right? Things that were already built and components that I could assemble. Fast forward to today, I think that is much more of the norm because there's open source components for everything. If I'm doing AI ML today, for example, why would I
Yeah,
have to do anything from scratch? There are all
exactly.
these frameworks available. If I look at containerization, CNCF ecosystems, monitoring, logging, everything's there, right?
And that answers in part your question. The fact
Yeah.
that it's a jungle
Hmm.
and there are so many icons and logos is
Hmm.
not really a problem.
Hmm.
You go in
Hmm.
and you look around to see whether you can find the things that can help you run faster and
Yeah.
learn less about things that you don't care about.
Yeah.
And maybe the rule of thumb is what out there is not really in the critical path of your business logic. Okay. And how easy then it is to consume it, how easy it is to integrate it, and
Hmm.
how much faster it would allow your set of resources to focus on what you really need them to
Yeah.
do, something that you cannot just bring in from the different ecosystems.
Yeah. There's a flip side to that though, Ron, right? I was just thinking about this AI ML example. Again, they have the same issue. They have tool sprawl. There's just so many tools for different types of, and they have a pipeline too. Like they have an AI pipeline. Just like there's a coding pipeline, CI/CD pipeline, and every stage requires a different set of tools. And to the point you were making earlier, if I have a development team, they're not familiar with those tools, right? So what happens in practice is they'll go search on Google and say, hey, what's out there, GitHub stars or whatever is popular. They know nothing about it. It's downloadable, it's available, so you can download it, run it, and see if it works. You spend some days on it, try to integrate with something else. It fails. Now what do? You go back to the community, ask somebody on Slack, some Reddit here or there. I mean, that's all just to me non-value added activity to your business project,
Yeah,
right? So
okay,
that's the flip side, right? The flip side is sure these components exist, but they're not all in the same level of maturity. As we were saying earlier, there's still a problem in the open source community. All these things are evolving at different rates. So you still have to do all of this legwork, all of this research, all of this testing, and
sure,
you fail, you try again, you fail again, you try, and that's not time to value. That's breaking
definitely.
your time to value business value, right?
Mhm.
So how do you go about this?
Well, look, I mean, it's a combination, I think, between two activities.
Mhm.
One, you have to spend some time learning. I don't think that you can avoid, you're going to have to experiment, you're going to have to fail. There used to be this view of like, fail fast.
Mhm.
You should learn fast. Okay.
Mhm. Mhm.
You should aim not to fail. Yeah. Just if you do, take something out of it. Um, but then there's enough expertise now, I think,
Mhm.
after so many years of so many projects out there,
Mhm.
that you can actually buy or partner
Mhm.
for some of these capabilities.
Right.
Um, and I think we reached a stage that if you stack the problem, right,
Mhm.
there are large pieces that can really be something organizations partner for. Okay, and we obviously as somebody like Platform 9
Mhm.
covers a very, very big piece of it, but
Mhm.
it's now very, widely available. And obviously, if an organization is at the beginning or in the middle of, the thinking process and the re-architecture of the software,
Mhm.
partnering to try to get some expertise from the outside to cover
Right.
these type of layers would be important.
Yeah.
And again, maybe just borrowing from my history. I mean, when networking functions started making their path into this re-architecture and cloud,
Mhm.
most cloud technology did not support, what now we consider as basic technologies like packet acceleration, just the
Mhm.
ability to,
Mhm.
move bits around fast.
Right.
So it had to be invented.
Yep.
Now, those that cared more worked hard on inventing it. And if you look back 5 years ago, there were many, many implementations running in parallel. Now, if you want an accelerated platform for networking, building it yourself just seems like a bad idea. Okay,
Right.
you can
Exactly.
partner for that,
Yeah.
very, very easily, making it a much, much better path forward.
Mm.
Um, and as you start talking about things like, containers and Kubernetes and automation and CI/CD and all these things,
Mm.
obviously, not that I'm biased by any means, be part of Platform 9, but I think
Yeah.
that we are one of the best to be able to go and offer those capabilities
Mm.
for those that are trying to use it, and
Yeah.
really work with them to try to figure out how they leverage things that exist in order to go faster.
That makes a lot of sense. I
But
mean,
maybe
to your,
just
yeah.
one more word. Yeah?
Yeah.
I mean, I always like to maybe just think of the extreme, right? Of like, what does done mean?
Hmm.
Just,
Hmm.
very, very basic, right? I mean, done means that the developer can build the code without understanding the infrastructure, and every path is automated. Yeah, they don't need to figure out what is the infrastructure, what is the scale of the infrastructure, what is the scale of the audience for the code, how it integrates with everything around it, yeah, and when it can be pushed into production, right?
Yeah.
So if that's the end game, now the question is, what needs to be done ahead of this, perfect outcome? Oh, and of course, more recently, like where would the workload run, right? Because latency is now
Mm.
becoming a limiting factor, and we want to go to the edge, and we want to
Yeah.
bounce between different, on-premise and public cloud environments, and which region. All these things needs to be abstracted. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's the
Can I play devil's advocate for a
no,
second?
absolutely.
Abstraction. I love abstraction, right? Abstraction as a developer, back in the day, Java abstracted everything, right? So you didn't have to worry about write once, what was that? Write once, run anywhere was the mantra back then,
Yeah.
right? It seems like and Java did a great job of that. And in the early days, it was run. I was in a consulting company back then, and Java was still very early days, and it had a lot of bugs in it, right? So instead of write once, run everywhere, we used to say write one, test everywhere. It doesn't work on every infrastructure
Yeah.
because it hadn't gotten all the pieces right. I would argue two things. I would say, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. One, I don't think we've reached a stage of maturity in the industry where we can say we have the abstraction layer, and I'm thinking broadly. I'm thinking multiple public clouds. I'm thinking the edge. I'm thinking data centers. This whole thing, right? Run anywhere to me means I can run anywhere. Literally, I can run anywhere.
Yeah.
I don't think we're there. The abstraction layer doesn't exist. And it's not write once, run anywhere. I can just push a button and put it anywhere I want. So that's one. The other piece, I would argue, is that I might need special hardware to get certain performance and get certain specific features from the infrastructure. I need some customization, right?
Okay.
You can't just make it a, one for everybody. And
Yeah.
it may not meet the needs of everybody, right? So there
Yeah.
might be specialized needs. If you say all you can run is, in the olden days, in the Ford, I'm pretty sure you've heard of that, right? Ford had this one, you can buy a car as long as it's black.
Yeah.
And, no, I want all kinds of shapes and sizes. And so what do you say to this? I mean, if you abstract everything, it just becomes just such a low, common denominator that it doesn't do anything special. How do
No.
you break
So,
this thing, right?
well, a lot of a lot of thoughts. I'll try to organize
Hmm.
things in my mind. So first of all, I mean, abstraction happens at many layers. Yeah,
Hmm.
it's not an all or nothing. You can abstract a piece of hardware in one way or another, but not the interfaces, not the types of UIs or what the UI framework might even be. So think you write an app that can run both on a PC and on a phone.
Hmm.
Hopefully, if they don't look the same. Okay.
Yeah.
otherwise you're going to get a horrible user experience. Yeah. Then the question is another question of abstraction is how do you get it? I mean, what I liked about Java in the second iteration was that this thing was created also dating myself as agent is what's called a Java Web Start. Hopefully you remember those days. Why? Because it was it can run anywhere. Just how does it get there was a big question. Yeah. It was a lot of steps to get to the point in time where you can download the thing that runs and then figure out how to run it. So Java Web Start came in order to simplify really to the point where you can click something and things happen in the background and finally it starts. So you don't have to start with really trying to abstract everything, but abstract the things that are in the way. And to your point of hardware requirements, when machine learning started, most clouds and most virtualization technologies did not understand GPUs.
Right.
So
exactly.
obviously,
That was the point I was making. Yeah, exactly.
the first couple of years, you had to create a specialized cloud. The good thing about specialized cloud, and it's exactly the same example as what I gave with networking, is that they become common over time. Yeah, where now nobody even concerns themselves, I think, in trying to find the right NIC or the right GPU in the cloud. It just becomes part of what you ask the cloud for, and then it's a responsibility of whatever orchestration you use at whatever level to come back with the best answer. Yeah. So it becomes part of what you would like to declare as a requirement and get accommodated, automatically.
That's the key. I think what you said there is key because this abstraction is there's automation involved here, right? That is the key. If I need specialized hardware because I'm running machine learning or I'm running some network acceleration stuff that I need very fast packet processing or whatever, I need to be able to say, hey, my code, not me, when I'm saying I'm talking about me being a developer, right?
Yeah.
Or an end user that is requesting some sort of a infrastructure or some sort of a resource that satisfies their requirements, right? From a performance, latency, CPU, GPU, that kind of stuff, right? And if you can say, hey, just give it to me, and whatever magic happens, it just says, here it is. Here's your resource, and now your code can run on it in a very optimal, in the way that it satisfies the requirements. That's what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying, and even more than that, right? I mean, like once upon a time, you would go and say, my code needs, in order to do performance X, it needs this particular processor as a minimum.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if you decompose your software and make it auto scale, you can run and reach that with combination of processors, which might even not be the same and definitely not up to the spec that you thought you needed, which translates to the correct performance, maybe, and then the measurement becomes all of a sudden a pricing exercise. Does it fit the performance to dollar ratio that you wanted, right? But instead of actually saying, no, Mr. Customer, Mr. User, you must have this processor, you don't care, right? I mean, you can let the system give you the performance based on whatever resource is available to it. Okay.
We're not there yet, though. Are we there? Are there technologies that allow you? I mean, it almost sounds like nirvana, right? I mean, to me, like the end kind of state might be that the infrastructure is provisioned almost in an automated way based on the needs of your software or your application, right? I don't think we're there yet. I mean, a lot of this plumbing has to be done manually, the costing and all of this stuff, right?
Scaling of an application, I would argue, is possible today. You can architect your software to run at a footprint that goes really from a fraction of a virtual core and scale automatically to whatever number, okay, of transactions per second, packet per second,
Mm.
data in and out,
Yeah.
CPU cycles that can be achieved. Now, there is a lot of intentional design steps that you need to take in order to enable that. So it's
Right.
not if what you mean by we're not there is that it's not free, meaning it not just happens. Yeah, it doesn't just happen. And since so much software actually needs to get re-architected to become
That
native.
is the point. That is exactly the point I was making. It's not there in the sense that there's a lot of heavy lifting, and
Oh, of course.
which brings us to I think the core question. If you're cloud native, you need to have certain characteristics,
Yeah,
right? We touched upon some things. We need abstraction of infrastructure. We need decomposable applications, and you need maybe services that are, just open and available and secure. But none of this is free. I mean, this is so walk us through. I know we have maybe 10 minutes left here, but walk us through the journey, right? This sounds like almost like if I'm at state A, I don't have any of these things
yeah,
today, and I need to get to that point. And I know you've been through this journey
yeah.
in some of your previous roles. What does that look like? What are the four or five characteristics
So
that
look,
would define a cloud native environment?
we talked about the abstraction. So
Yeah,
let's just talk about the infrastructure and say that your developer needs to understand a very simple thing. There's no control anymore on what the infrastructure would be. Okay, they can specify needs in terms of
yeah,
processing and specialized accelerators and things of that sort, but that needs to be defined as a declared requirement and not mandatory
right.
for the software.
Hmm.
Then there is the very basic elements of re-architecting the software, and the one that is, I think very widely known is that, most software was written as some kind of a monolith,
That's right.
maybe functionally separated. It needs to be broken down to the quote unquote microservices level, just
No,
so.
not necessarily though, right? Let me kind of ask you this. Not everybody is containerized, right? From what we've seen at Platform
Sure.
9, and I talked to a lot of customers and prospects and so on. I mean, there is some movement, but there's so much existing legacy software that's running in VMs and even bare metal,
Sure.
right?
So first, I mean, I want to make
Yeah,
sure that separating the software to pieces doesn't
yeah,
necessarily mean containers, because you can build a humongous container with no
right.
separation, and you can actually
Yeah.
shrink down your functional pieces in VMs. Yeah. To
Hmm.
what degree you need to do it, and to the
Hmm.
point we talked about at the beginning, whether it even makes sense for this particular piece of coding, the big picture of your business logic. It might not, and there might be a piece of your software that just is maintained as a VM. It does its thing, and it's just a piece of the overall architecture. It's not an all or nothing. The
Hmm.
important piece in breaking things down is really to reach a footprint agreement that basically says it would be affordable for me to allow the system to auto scale. So the footprint of a particular piece needs to go small enough, yeah, to be distributed and run in an orchestrated fashion. Okay.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
not the same answer to every piece of software in every organization.
True, but the point I'm making is not all of them need to be microservices.
Not
You could
not
still
all of
have,
them to
yeah,
be
you
that.
could still have some. I'm thinking of a scenario where, you have the classical three layer, three tier architecture of the old days, right? You have the
Yeah.
database, you've got the middleware, the front, the UI piece, right? So you could conceivably, and a pretty practical thing to do is to containerize the front end or the
Sure.
middleware and
That's
leave the database in a VM, for example, or on a bare metal server, right?
uh,
It's
uh,
perfectly possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess,
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah,
another very well-known principle is the separation of the data from the business logic and
yeah,
making
yeah,
things stateless.
yeah,
Obviously, you're not separating data from function in a database,
yeah,
right?
yeah. That's
So
right. Yeah.
again, I mean that would continue to be stateful and will contain all the data.
Yeah.
Now, how you interface into it, and maybe the other big bucket is openness and kind of being an API-led
Hmm.
design,
Right.
serve in part an ability to go in and actually
Hmm.
communicate between all of these different pieces,
Hmm.
and on the other, allowing the developers to kind of like break apart and start running processes in parallel, knowing that they can make changes over time, right?
Right.
And that accelerates the whole, let's push as much, product changes to production as quickly as
Hmm.
possible.
Is this
Um,
aligned to some of the 12 factor stuff I hear about in the container world? Similar to that, right? I mean, you're
Very
taking
much.
your applications, breaking them into small self-contained pieces that are able to communicate with each other over APIs and so on, right? I mean, this was again, I may be dating myself, but back in the day when I was writing C code, I would do this manually. I would create functions, where you pass parameters and it does one thing and one thing only, and then you kind of put them all together in libraries. It's a very similar concept, but I think now we're kind of doing it at scale, right? I mean,
Yeah.
in a distributed fashion.
My master's thesis was, creating a system that looks at C code functions and understand the interdependencies and
Mm,
recommend whether your design, the
yeah,
separation,
yeah.
is actually correct or not. Because you might actually build two separate functions, right? That talk among them
Mm,
so frequently that
mm.
it was a poor choice to separate the two functions.
That's a
Okay,
great.
just on the
That's a
other.
fun project. That's a fun project.
Oh, it was
Yeah,
not fun.
yeah. No, but it's a very useful thing, right? I mean, if you have a large number of functions, hundreds, thousands, it's very hard to know, right, what's actually happening at
Exactly.
runtime, right? Yeah,
Exactly right.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
And then maybe like the fourth piece is really this, DevOps piece and
Mm,
really, designing for automatic
yeah,
lifecycle management
yeah,
of everything in the stack. Okay.
yeah,
How do you do continuous delivery? How do you install, scale? How do you terminate? How do you move? What is the redundancy, infrastructure that might be needed, and how do you actually enable that for geo
yeah,
redundancy or single site redundancy?
yeah.
Um, but there needs to be an understanding that it will not be a human that
Mm,
decides what operations of the different layers of the stack does at any point in time. You define your goals,
mhm,
right? You declare the goals, automation takes ownership of that, builds the clusters, maintain the clusters, upgrade the clusters, sets up the communication, gets the latest piece of software that you would like to push to production, installs it, make sure that all the dependencies
mm,
between all the pieces of your application actually get the correct treatment, and if not, fixes it, and all in a way that makes it transparent to the developer that can go and continue
mm,
to build their piece
mm.
of this puzzle.
Right, right. No, those are great principles. So we geeked out a bit here, Ron, using our technology stuff. So we spoke a lot about the technology, the principles, the architecture, abstraction. Let's switch gears. We've got a few minutes left here, maybe 5, 10 minutes here. I want to speak about the journey, right? The cultural and the challenging decisions. And you've been through this. You've done this transformation. What are some of the most difficult decisions you needed to take as you were transforming the company, right? I mean, it's not an easy transformation, I can imagine, if you're in a legacy world with, people that don't have the skills, etc. Can you
Yeah.
tell me a couple of stories from your past?
Look, I think the biggest decision is whether you are actually interested, okay,
Mm,
in making the transformation. Okay.
mm.
And we
Yep.
covered, the fact that some things just don't need to go through it, and trying to force it usually
Yeah.
gets you nowhere, right? It gets you to a monolith, all-style application running as a huge one VM that will never change. It was very
Mm,
costly to create, very costly to test, doesn't really buy you any of the benefits that we
yeah.
talked about. Okay?
Yeah.
The second will be the steps that you take. Okay, I mean the learning, especially at the beginning, are usually hard. Okay, and in onboarding the necessary pieces that are not yours, okay,
Mm.
into a system is hard. Try not to
Is
do it.
that is that a not a, so is that like a cultural thing? Most engineering teams that I worked with have this not invented here syndrome, right? This whole attitude of we can build everything, right? We're the best.
Yeah,
You know.
look, I mean,
Yeah.
true to some
Yeah.
degree, but
Yeah.
I think that you need to recognize one thing. I mean, getting things to work on like the first couple of servers
Mhm.
is not an indicator of what would be required to go to production and scale. I, and I think most engineers understand it. So resist the urge that after you set up a few servers thinking, I got it. Okay. Yeah, you understand enough. Okay. But it's really just a stepping stone.
Mhm.
And the more you work on your own application, I think the more it's going to become obvious that some of these building blocks are better handed off to an expert. And
Right.
more importantly, and sorry for the obvious plug, but it's not just a matter of getting the technology from someone. You want it managed. Okay. I mean,
Yeah.
you want somebody to come in and actively look over what is happening to make sure that it's working, removing the need for you to do that.
Right.
And then when you start understanding from this, ecosystem variety that you need more pieces, get help in onboarding these pieces, get help in managing these pieces, get help in integrating into these pieces.
Mhm.
And that's really where, we shine. We see
Right.
so many examples of these transformations that it's now almost obvious to us ahead of time, and we can actually communicate, okay, it's stage 4 is where you're probably going to have the most difficulty, where you're going to need help from ecosystem components, etc., right? And
Right.
I mean,
Right.
I wish I had that help, at the,
Mm.
6, 7 years ago when we
Yeah.
were trying to
I'm
build.
curious, how long did it take? I mean, I'm sure every organization's journey is going to be different. Today is different from 5 years ago. But what should somebody expect if they're just starting from scratch, right? I mean, that may not be real. Some people are in different stages of the journey, obviously.
Yeah.
Does it take a year? Does it take 5 years? What should people expect?
Well, I guess, I don't want to cop out and say it depends, but it depends.
I
Yeah.
knew the answer was going to be depends.
Look,
But I
it
want a
really,
ballpark, right? I know that if I want to
if
go
you
from here
have,
to New
if
York,
you
right?
have
Yeah,
today a
yeah.
mature, complex system, I would say a reasonable end-to-end time frame is 3 years. Okay.
Okay.
If you're starting from scratch,
Yeah.
you can probably do this in much, much less, I would say 1 year. Okay. Um, and actually it could be also be more than 3, right, depending on the
Right.
complexity and
Yeah.
how much external forces, right, are placed,
Right.
like regulatory forces,
Yeah.
region,
Yeah.
things like
Plus,
that.
getting help, as you were saying earlier, getting expertise. Building expertise takes time,
That's right.
right? And there is a challenge today in this cloud native talent is very hard to get by. Is to get, it's not, they're not just growing on trees. People are still trying to get educated, they're getting trained. They're not available off the street, right? So
That's right.
that's another consideration, certainly, that we should think about. We're almost coming to the end here, Ron. This was a fascinating conversation. I loved. This is the kind of geeky stuff and stuff that I'd love to talk about. But hopefully, it was useful to everybody that was live here today, and maybe checking this out later in the recording. Maybe just before we wrap up, I mean, all of us have hobbies and things that we do outside of work. And you had mentioned when we were chatting the other day that you were doing some tinkering with cars, and what was that project all about?
So I decided that I wanted to learn how to build dashboards
Uh,
for cars. So I needed an excuse to design a new dashboard for my car. So I decided to design a new interface for a computer that will manage, the media and the mapping and everything that today you basically get, off the shelf.
Right.
So starting with a digitizer and a screen and designing some software that actually hooks all the controls from the car, and
That's amazing.
it was built into a fairly old vehicle, so it was
Yeah.
nice to kind of like connect the analog world of the
Yeah.
time age of that car
Yeah.
into a running system.
Yeah.
It
These
was a
days,
lot of fun.
everything is digitized. I think it's pretty much fly by wire,
Pretty much,
right?
yeah. I
But
mean,
how did you figure out what to connect? I mean, you must know the car inside and out, right?
hey, you don't have to know everything, right? I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
like everything in the modern world, there's plenty of knowledge out there in community. You
Yeah.
just have to find them. Yeah.
That's right. That's
So,
right. Yeah.
I mean, some stuff I had to learn and code myself. A lot of stuff, it was enough to post, a simple question in some forum somewhere,
Yeah.
and code will show up literally the next day.
That's the
So,
beauty of community, right? So all these
exactly.
channels out there now, there's Slack, Reddit, and Stack Overflow, and on the tech side. But I'm pretty sure they have something similar on the cars. And hey,
That's
Mike, we're wrapping up here.
Hey,
Great conversation. Just wanted to hand it back over to you for any closing thoughts.
yeah. I'll say hopefully we see a blog from Ron or something like that in the future about his journey and what he gets done. It'll be neat to see. All right, yeah. So
Yeah.
where we're going to be next week? You're going to be are both you going to be at ArgoCon next week, or just
Yeah, that's
Kamesh?
right.
Or
I forgot to
absolutely.
mention. Yeah, ArgoCon, lots going on there. Obviously it's Tuesday. Both Ron and I will be there. Looking forward to it. We're actually announcing. We even mentioned Arlon. I think you might have said that, right, Mike, at some point, or maybe we should have another session to just
yeah, in the last
discuss
stream I
that.
kind of talked about it a little bit. I'm sure we'll have more info coming out soon.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about Arlon, showing it off at the ArgoCon conference. So if anybody's out there, just come by. We also have a breakfast, so feel free to join us there. That'll be cool.
All right, awesome. I'll do the wrap up. All right, so if you want to talk to us, join us on Slack, slack.platform9.io. If you want to reach out directly to me or have any questions or anything, at M. Peterson, Kamesh is on there too. Ron might be
Yeah.
right. Ron might be on there as well. But that's our show for today. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week with some information about Arlon. So thanks both of you so much.
Yeah,
All right,
thank
we're
you. It
going in
was
now.
fun.
Have a
Yeah,
good one.
thanks. Take care. Bye bye.